to everybody joining us today. Let me start off just by introducing myself. So my name is Jack Sweeney, and I have worked in consumer products for brands for around about 10 years, most recently up until last year for Karcher as their marketing director. And at the end of last year, start of this year, decided I wanted a change in career and subsequently started the business that I now run today called JDS Strategists. And we are very much focused on supporting business leaders like yourselves in the consumer product sector with commercial strategy. And that is business and brand, long-term thinking, and also the shorter-term go-to-market category and channel. And one of the areas that was a large part of my role at Karcher and has subsequently become a big part of what I do at JDS is this topic of direct-to-consumer. And that's what I wanted to talk about for the next 20 minutes or so. So the agenda will be very simple. We'll start with the 5 fundamental questions that you need to answer before launch or before significant investment. We will then talk about the important topic of managing trade conflict and what do you do about your existing trade and retail relationships and how to best manage that. And then finally, some frameworks and some advice on where to focus your efforts initially. But I wanted to just define direct-to-consumer before we get into that. And as a child of the 90s, I remember the Avon lady turning up at the door to sell my mother all things cosmetics. And that, by definition, is a direct-to-consumer model, albeit traditional doorstep. And then fast forward a decade, and of course, the cliche example of Apple. And Steve Jobs was famously obsessed with wanting to own the experience for the consumer end to end. So in 2001, he opened the first Apple store, and they now have thousands of them around the world. But the area that I want to focus on today is online direct-to-consumer, which was really fueled in the early 2000s by the advancement of technology, the internet, and social media, which made it much more accessible for new companies as well as existing companies to sell online and thus sell direct. So the focus here is to give you pragmatic advice if you are a retail distributed brand through DIY or electrical outlets on how to set this up online selling direct to your end customer and the consumer. So let's dive into the 5 fundamental questions. And is often the case with these things, the first question has to be why. Why are you doing it? And there are many benefits to setting direct-to-consumer up and to proactively investing in it. I think probably the most popular one I hear from my clients is margin. Of course, there's a lot more margin to be made selling direct versus through retail, but also reduced reliance on retailers, particularly in light of COVID, which we'll come on to talk about a little bit more, and also owning the customer experience from front to back. But why this is more important than just highlighting the benefits is because challenges will come. They're inevitable. Investment will be required, change is necessary, and there will be cultural pressure on the business. And as I said, because all of those challenges are inevitable, in the heat of battle, let's say in 3 or 6 months' time, when you've decided to go after direct-to-consumer, these things will happen. And if you don't have your why very clear in your own mind and your whole business bought in around it and driving it, it can be very easy to respond quite tactically to those pressures and potentially even give up. And I've seen examples of this. And that's always a regret in time because the challenges will come. So make sure you know your why and communicate it constantly and consistently. Secondly is who is commercially accountable? And this is typically the age-old debate of sales versus marketing. This is a topic we discussed in our last webinar, or we touched on certainly. But from a direct-to-consumer standpoint, it's not sales and marketing. It's sales and marketing and logistics and IT and customer services and. So I always bring this back to strategic principles, and these are principles that I would use in all strategic projects, direct-to-consumer or otherwise. And the first of those is single source accountability. I believe it is really important that one person in your business has ultimate accountability for the delivery of any initiative, or in this case, direct to consumer. There are people responsible for different elements, but ultimately one person should be accountable. And secondly, that business and brand strategy must precede category and channel, which is where direct to consumer would sit. If you want to invest in direct to consumer and grow it, that's great, but it should be forming part of a larger, broader business strategy, which of course means leadership buy-in and public sponsorship are really important. So again, my recommendation here is to pick a single leader based on attributes, not title. Leadership can come from either sales or marketing, which is where it typically sits, but it's more about having relevant experiences and, most importantly, broad project management skills. Thirdly, where? Where will the expertise and resource come from? And let's look at this from an in-source versus outsource perspective. So in-sourcing, you could recruit, you could hire an e-commerce manager or a head of direct to consumer, or you could look to upskill existing employees if the skill base isn't already in the business. Versus outsourcing, which you could go to an agency, and there are many specialist e-commerce and direct to consumer agencies out there, or you could use a consultant, which is obviously where I have a little bit of preference. But my main point here in terms of guidance is invest in one and invest, because I've seen too many times over the last 6 to 12 months, companies who have actually been trying to do this for years and they've made no progress. They've grown maybe 5 or 10% a year. And if this is done well and you invest in expertise and you invest in resource and you have a relatively small base in a fairly large market, you should be seeing triple-digit growth every single year. So my advice on this is to outsource to launch or to get going, inject your business with the resource and expertise required, but then over time in-source to scale, because when it gets to a critical mass, of course, it will be more cost effective for you and your business to have those competencies in-house. Number 4, how? How will you adapt operations? And there is an important distinction here between you as a manufacturing brand or possibly an import brand to now becoming the retailer. So distinction between brand and retail. And that means retail CX fundamentals, customer experience fundamentals apply. So if we consider 4 strands, website and eComm, your website needs to be able to sell. It needs to offer slick payment methods and everything that comes with offering e-commerce online. The one that's often forgotten, but most important, is everything that's happening behind the scenes. So what the customer doesn't see is all of your data integrations, your systems integrations, and how you're managing that data, as well as analytics. Thirdly is logistics. And if you think you're probably coming from a world of pallet or even container shipment into 10, 20, maybe 30 customers, you're now going to be doing single pick and pack shipments to hundreds, hopefully thousands of consumers. And that is a very different logistical model that must be considered early on. And finally is customer service, and expect customer service inquiries to increase and to evolve. You will go from answering primarily questions on product performance or quality issues post-purchase to where's my order? My order hasn't been delivered yet, or it was broken on delivery. And they're very different types of inquiries, and those inquiries will increase. So these are all considerations that need putting into the pot very, very early on. And this is why my recommendation here is involve all of those departments and people from day one to capture the big picture and also get the buy-in across the business. And finally, what will your value proposition be? Which in other words is, why should a customer, end customer, buy direct from you versus Amazon or B&Q or Currys? And you can give them reasons to buy, RTBs. That could be product, maybe exclusive product, or variation on products that are already sold through distribution. Could be price, although I never recommend this in the early stages. You could have more aggressive pricing or more aggressive promotions. That's a very dangerous point when we come on to trade relationships. And finally, added value, which could be free accessories or bundle deals or extra warranty periods. Really, the possibilities are endless and they're very dependent on the business. But there's one important thing to remember here, which is you already have a reason to buy. You're the brand. And if I look to 2 research sources, these are pieces of research that have been done recently, From Brand Shop, 90% of consumers' online preference is to buy direct from you. They want to buy from you. And secondly, your site is the most trusted information source after friends and family recommendation. So if you give them the option to buy, then they want to buy from you. So that's the point here, is that if we flip the why should a customer buy direct to what's stopping a customer buying direct, what are the barriers in place? That might be the ability, like do you even offer the option to buy on your website? It could be awareness. Is it visible on your website that someone can buy? And then the approach, are you making it easy and enjoyable to an extent for the customer to buy directly from you on your website? So I always think here that primarily the recommendation and in the early stages should be to remove barriers, and that will deliver your early growth, because as we've said, consumers want to buy directly from you. So let's just give them the option and make it an enjoyable experience. But of course, we cannot forget your existing customers and your existing trade relationships, of which I think most of you on this webinar this morning, the majority of your business is already fulfilled through those channels. And spoiler alert, the truth is they are never going to like your decision to sell direct. So if you've come onto the webinar looking for the golden bullet, I'm afraid I don't have it. It's very understandable that retailers will not like the decision for you selling direct to what they would consider their customers. Having said that, they will understand why. They're not going to like it, but they will understand it. And if we look at the Office of National Statistics data on internet sales as a percentage of total sales, you can see over the last 10 years, this has been steadily rising up to about 20% in 2019. And then COVID happened, and I'm sure everyone has spent a lot of time thinking about this topic and talking about this topic, but COVID changed internet usage for sales in a radical way. It brought forward that trend probably by about 5 years. And as we go into a lockdown again tomorrow, unfortunately, the predictions are that internet sales as a percentage of total is going to spike above 45%. So there is a huge trend there already, and particularly with COVID shutting down parts of retail, you have to be able to get your products to your end customers. One of the things I encourage clients to do in the early stages of a project is be the buyer. Put yourself into the buyer's shoes and ask the question, what would you do if you were the buyer, or what could you do? And there are two things to consider here. Firstly is your brand strength. Do you have a strong market share and a strong demand from end users for your products? And then secondly, what are the dynamics within your category? Is it a brand-led market, a value-led market, a price-led market, a design-led market? And is it more brand or commodity? Because the stronger the brand preference in the category, and then the stronger your brand within that category, the more difficult it is for retailers to respond in a negative way. And that's the final point here, is the trick is to avoid doomsday thinking. You know, many times have I had conversations where businesses like you have gone, on day 2 of launching this, we're going to lose all of our retail customers. And that is just not the case. Now, of course, it needs to be treated sensitively, but it is very unlikely, particularly if you have a strong brand in a competitive market, that that is going to happen. And there are 2 questions really to answer about what happens next, or what you need to do next if you're considering this. Question 1 is, are you already selling direct to consumer? And if you are your trade partners already aware? And if the answer to those 2 questions is yes, then you can just proceed to the build. And we'll talk about that build in a few slides' time. If the answer to either of those questions is no, my recommendation is to create and go to your buyers with a go-to-market brief or a go-to-trade brief. And with that, I would advocate to be early and honest within reason in those discussions with your trade partners and with your buyers, and be prepared for initial conflict and compromise. As we've already highlighted, they will not like this decision, but they will understand it and they will respect you for coming to them with this brief. But be ready to make some compromises. And within that brief, I would encourage you to share genuine benefits. And this is one of the misillusions with direct to consumer. And I understand it from the retailer standpoint, but if you do direct to consumer right, you actually should grow the overall size of your brand and hopefully the category, because you'll be spending more money on marketing. That will lead to brand growth, which will lead to trade sales growth. And in a similar vein, if you're acquiring more data, which is often a big challenge for brands because most of your sales are transacted through retail, you're getting that data from the end user. That helps you with customer insight, helps you with product development, may help you with better go-to-market plans. That helps you then drive additional demand, which then drives additional trade sales growth. Now, I don't suggest you take this message in this format to your buyers because it could be seen as quite inflammatory, but I do suggest that you make them aware that there is an overall benefit to this because of the increased investment and additional data. To talk about why you're doing it through a lens. Is it to reach new consumer groups that they can't reach? Is it to test new products or propositions that you want to test first to make sure that they will sell through when you put them into retail, and that's helping retailers with stock management and cash flow? How are you going to do it? And think about product pricing and advertising here and how you will avoid direct competition, that you're not going to undercut the market, that you are going to only offer a limited range of products, or that you're not going to advertise in particular channels where retailers are quite dominant or quite heavy within those spaces. And then what further support can you provide your trade partners in light of this news if required? Can you offer them additional trade marketing, be that in store or online? Can you do some collaborative media campaigns, the objective being to either drive footfall or to drive traffic? And there's a visual here, which is a new tool that's come out from Channel Advisor, which is really, really smart, called Shoppable Media, where if you have the data capabilities with your retailers to all link into a central database, it will update live on adverts which retailers have stock, and of course prioritize those that do. And of course, the most important thing is that your customer gets your product. I know there are lots of other things, I'm sure, on a case-by-case basis that can be done. But assuming that you are committed to launching direct-to-consumer or to growing direct-to-consumer, and you have a plan of action to support trade through this decision, what's the next steps to get started? Well, there is a very simple framework that I've used for years, and you can see here some of the topics we've discussed: reasons to buy or value proposition, customer experience, both pre and post-purchase, and then traffic. We talked RTBs could be brand, which is obviously a natural one, product or price, added value. Customer experience is very much the website, fulfillment in terms of delivery and payment, and then of course that customer service element, and traffic. Search engine marketing, Google is critical in this and would be my first investment above any other media channel for direct to consumer. But of course there's social media, affiliates, email. And also don't forget that you can use traditional media channels like TV or radio or print or PR to drive online sales. You can tag your website on product placements within PR. You could do direct response TV, which is a piece of activity I've done for brands in the past. And all of that is what would be deemed as traditional media being used to drive a digital channel. If we then bring that back down into RTBs, what's really important here is if you do have a strong value proposition, exclusive products or aggressive promotional prices, balance the visibility of that with the aggression. And the visibility, of course, through your digital marketing and on your website versus the aggression of the offer. And if you're going to be aggressive, then be less visible. Use below the line tactics like email or product page placement, because you're more likely to be identified and have backlash from those trade partners. But as we discussed a few slides ago, for me, really, the focus for good, strong brands in mature markets, the focus should be on that customer experience because you have the reason to buy, which is your brand. So let's just give people the opportunity through a good experience to buy directly from you. And when we look at that, you have your website, which of course is mainly accessed now through probably a mobile. followed by the desktop and then the tablet. And what you want to understand is, how are people getting to your website? And there's some great tools out there like Google Trends or Answer the Public, which are both tools I use almost daily at the moment. That will really help you to understand what people are doing and how they're behaving before they get to your website. And then what you want to do is understand what they're doing once they're on your website. How are they behaving and what is their experience? And again, tools like Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics. And I think there's a webinar tomorrow from Brew, which is another BHETA services provider, who is going to be going into more detail on this. But this is really important to map the physical journey, then the experience felt by the customer, and then finally all the processes that are happening behind the scenes that make those two things happen. So look at this, focus here. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight the 3 KPIs that really matter. There are hundreds of KPIs that you can look at within Google Analytics, but from an eComm perspective, there are really only 3 that matter. And that is traffic, number of people coming to your website, conversion, the number of people that visit your website that buy, and then average order value, which is the average amount of money a customer is spending once they're on your website. And by doubling traffic, and the other 2 stay the same, you double sales. The same if you double conversion, you double sales. Now, if your traffic is already healthy to your website, my suggestion would be to focus in these 2 areas on conversion, which you can really impact through customer experience on your website, and AOV, which is helping customers understand trade-up value. So why should they buy model X, which is more expensive than model Y, or accessories or detergents or consumables that can help them with the product purchase. But really the main point here is that if you already have healthy traffic, focus on the conversion and the average order value. If you don't have strong traffic, then you will need to invest some time there pretty early on. But that really is all from me, but I wanted to leave you with one final thought. And actually this webinar was inspired by an article I wrote earlier in the year when the first lockdown happened. And that article was titled, "If Not Now, When?" And I made the case that if you were ever going to go for this, now would be the time with everything that we've just discussed. And given what's about to happen from tomorrow in England for the next 4 weeks at least, and who knows how long these restrictions will go on, it really is, if you're not going to do it now, then when are you? And I would strongly advocate that if this is something that has been on your radar and on your to-do list for the last 6 months, 12 months, or 5 years, do it now.